also what's interesting to notice is when I was working with the agency that dealt with this, I was reading these publications to really see what they produced. What I found fascinating was that maybe 2 weeks before the Westminster Bridge attack happened, in Rumaya they mentioned specifically in black and white a tactic that should be used in the West of hijacking a car or a van, plowing it into people, getting a gun or a knife, and propaganda and publications, and going ahead and killing. And almost 2 weeks or a week later, we see what happened in Westminster. So it seems to be really resonating with the followers, and we see the effects that it's had on society. And the fact that it's in publication form, you don't really expect it. You expect it to be in perhaps more consumable ways. Magazines perhaps may not work the same way they did in this society or in the West. As we mentioned, I don't know who the speaker was, that reading newspapers has dropped. I think it was yourself who mentioned, the consummation of newspapers has gone down, and there's much more easier ways to get information. But this shows that they have publications, online publications, and they're spreading their propaganda in very interesting ways. And what can we learn from their tactics? I mentioned a few things that we can learn, but we're going to go through some of my findings from the work I did in the past and share them with you today. Firstly, we notice that they have a deep meaning in each of the names of their publications and the message that they try to portray. In fact, in the first publication, although it harks back to a hadith, in one of the first publications they mention a quote from, I think, I can't remember who it was, but I think it was was Bin Laden or someone who they opened the publication with a quote from him. So they manipulate the ideology and they place their own ideology within it. So on the face of it, it seems as if it's a pure one with determination and passion, but it gets corrupted. So we have this. You also have the use of old historical names anchoring to the historical missions and the struggles of their group, which we found there. They also derive justification and authority for their actions, not from their own ideologies, but from a higher power, they believe. So there's no blood on their hands because they're just following what they believe is the true word. Therefore seen as an act on behalf of greater good rather than self-interest. So they're just enacting what they believe God has asked them to do. They target their enemies very specifically in the way they do that. They target the regions and demographics very specifically, as we saw from the different countries. And also to mention, before I go on, Dabik, this is something that I forgot to mention, Dabik, Constantine, Dar al-Islam, and Instok all disappeared, and they all conjugated into one publication. Perhaps because when Dabik was taken over by the Syrian Democratic Forces, they could no longer claim that as a place because their fight was lost there, so they quickly rebranded into the lost publication. So they're very agile in the way that they did that. Target enemies, targeted demographics, and the messaging is very targeted in their calls to action. They also, as you saw, they have practical advice to followers. So it's not just ideology, but it's practical. What can you do? How can you do it? And what are the intended effects? So almost a how-to guide, where you can pick it up and you can practice it yourself, and spread it to your friends and colleagues or your family who you think resonate with the same ideology. And they're very agile in their rebranding, as we saw. Once one publication lost its meaning, they were able to change their methodologies and go into a different form, but still spreading the same ideologies, but through different messaging forms. And what has been our response to this? Typically, it was to control the narrative, especially within the UK and the US, and in Europe in general, where attacks would happen. The defense governments and defense have tried to do this and have succeeded in different ways. Why have they tried to do this? Because they believe that it works. If you almost try to control what comes out of your own society, or at least shape the conversation, you can really flood the airwaves with counter-terrorist messaging, which hopefully would block out what the terrorists were trying to do. So it was chasing your own tail in a way. Even from our work, we found that it worked to an extent, but there were still gaps in our knowledge, and there were still things that we couldn't do. And I'll go through that in a minute now. These concepts are probably not new to a lot of you. The first concept of astroturfing is something that I'm sure you're all aware of, and that's something that was used by the different governments in different parts of the world. You have operations here in the US and the UK which have practiced this. This also reminds me of economic pump and dump schemes, where you would raise the profile of a stock, or of a penny stock, and then once it gets to a certain level, you would dump it and reap the rewards. So similar to ISIS, what we would do in the past was to target your enemies, target the region and demographics. Your messaging was very on point, and you were agile also in rebranding and making sure that your message hit the right audiences. And in my line of work, we would produce content on a daily basis, which was quite heavy in video form, in written form. We didn't really do a lot of GIFs and sort of more softer social media engagements, but more perhaps not academic, but traditional forms of media produced online. And this sort of, it hits a nerve in society, because we can see, for example, in yesterday's TV debates where the Conservatives rebranded one of their pages as a fact-checking Twitter site, which really sparked a lot of controversy. So when things happen like this, the public lose trust in institutions. But there's a debate as to whether we need to do this to keep our society safe, and at what level do we play this so that society accepts it. And it's a place where there's understanding on both sides, which is difficult to really gauge, but this is a question that we were trying to answer in the work that we used to do. How effective are these tactics? As I mentioned, it depends on their aims. And for example, our aim, when we were doing our work, was to prevent those who would have joined ISIS to join ISIS by seeing other content, to see what the realities of on the ground were. And how do you really measure something like this? This is something that we found very difficult to do. We were putting money into these, we were writing blogs and articles, videos, editing videos, but measuring our success, it's hard to show who would have joined ISIS if they didn't see your content. This is something that we tried to get over, and it was very difficult to do so. And there was metrics that we used to see how much our engagement was hitting them, and comparing it perhaps to what ISIS were doing, but it wasn't as mathematical as we would have liked, which really leaves a big question mark for us. This, I think, comes down to the very essence of what we try to do in counterterrorism. It's in my opinion anyway, it's a defensive game with preemptive capacity, meaning, especially with new media technology like cyber warfare, all you need is one bug or one hack, one attack to really hit your system. So you need to protect yourself 360 degrees, and to do so is very difficult, and it almost seems as if the innovation is on the side of the attacker to develop technologies to attack you, so you need to learn and try to fight back with the technologies that you've seen being used against you, and learn from them and continue. So this is something that we've seen in the past with not only media technologies, but weaponized technologies in the past. There's rumors of a technology that we need to build something to be theirs, and it becomes an arms race, which is very difficult to defend against. But we're learning as time goes on, I think. So we're going to leave you guys with some trends that we've seen happen, and these come from different sources too. This really goes into the use of social media, not only the amount, but also the different formats in which we use. First, we can see that globally we are spending more time on social media today than we were in the past, which is perhaps goes without saying. We're using a lot more social media channels also, and there's been a growth in dark social. So social media that isn't public, so used between Telegram, Signal, WhatsApp, close communications. So true messaging goes through these channels, and we're not able to monitor it to see what conversations are going on, and we miss a large chunk of our analysis and our ability to really see what the next moves are going to be. Again, this goes into the debate of privacy versus defense, and security, which has been one that's been going on since time immemorial. But it becomes more in your face when we see these technologies being developed. This is a graph that I pulled up from a source, as you can see from below. And this sees throughout time how much time we spent in terms of global regions on social media. You can see the APAC countries spending the most time on average at 2 hours, 22 minutes. Europe, Latin America, MENA, and North America down as you go. But still, perhaps North America not having too much engagement. We see the biggest engagement in APAC nations, and there's reasons behind all of this. Perhaps the saturation of media in the West has become to a point where we can't consume more than what we're doing. This is also something very interesting. We see that obviously between the ages of 16 to 24-year-olds are using social media the most. And on average, we are spending 2 hours, 23 minutes a day on social media. So we're consuming a lot, which means we're not only consuming content that this room is producing, but we're consuming other illicit media that perhaps are not in the best interests of national security. We have a little competition here. Between the ages of 16 to 24, who do you think are the top 3 countries who use social media the most? Shout it out. So top 3 countries. Who would you say?
China.
China? Who else?
South Korea.
South Korea? Saudi Arabia? Okay. Anyone else?
Estonia.
Estonia. So you've got Middle East, you've got Asia, right? You've got maybe Eastern Europe. So number 3, we have Colombia. Yeah. 4 hours, 12 minutes. Who's number 2? Who do you think number 2 is? Who says Saudi Arabia? Yeah? You think Saudi Arabia?
Yeah.
Philippines. Yeah? Number 1? Who can get number 1? If you get number 1, I'll buy you a drink. You're interested now, I can see. Turkey?
India?
Venezuela.
Who?
Venezuela.
Venezuela?
Yeah.
So what can you see in terms of these nations? What's the relationship in between these nations? So they're all emerging economies, and you can see that emerging economies are using social media a lot more than Western societies. Now here's another question. Who uses social media the least? The least?
Sweden.
Sweden? Who says Sweden? Okay, one Sweden, who else? Who do you think?
North Korea.
North Korea. All right. Who do you think? Ireland. You ready to see the answer, guys?
Greenland definitely.
Japan. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. It's in this report. I can share with you. This one. That source. They got a publication that says that.
So what they do?
Right? Interesting, isn't it? This is a list of social media platforms that each country uses. Right? So we have the UK here at 6.9 on average platforms that they use. So we have the Facebooks, the Instagrams, the WhatsApp.